Welcome back. Counting down to Budget 2022. Let's go across straight to my colleague Sakshi, who is tracking the markets. What is it looking like, Sakshi?
That's right, Vasu. Well, markets have begun on a firm note on budget day. Both the benchmark indices surging 1%. The Sensex currently trading over 600 points, well above the 58,000 mark. Sectors across the board really trading in the green, with leads coming in from banking and financial stocks. However, it is important to note at this point really that markets have been volatile for the last 2 weeks. We did see benchmark indices tumble as much as 5% over the last 2 weeks. Remember, there was volatility due to the Fed signals of a rate hike and inflation concerns globally. So we can't really just negate that. Of course, we've seen optimism over the last 2 days. Today also, markets really hopeful of course, all measures coming their way as far as Budget 2022 is concerned. Now, what experts really believe, experts feel the sectors worst hit, such as aviation, hotels, trade, must get the much needed relief or the booster shot, as it were, this budget. So experts feel the aviation sector is looking at for an excise duty cut on fuel. Remember, the hotel industry is looking at a tax break or a tax holiday if it were this budget. So experts really looking out for those cues as far as sectors that are worst hit are concerned. We'll only know in time to tell Vasu how markets trade during the day. Experts really feel that only afternoon trades post the announcement is what we should watch out for.
All right, Sakshi, thanks very much indeed for that. We'll come back to you as you keep a close eye on the markets. Let's just go back to panel, and let's also welcome B. Thiagarajan is with us. He's MD of Blue Star Limited, which as we know makes air conditioners and other such products, and he is also chairman of CII Western Region. Good morning, Mr. Thiagarajan. Good to have you on. Mr. Thiagarajan, I want to ask you, and this is something we were talking about just before the break, that one of the things we're seeing is that there seems to be a pretty healthy uptick in terms of corporate profits, especially as the economy starts to return to normal. Tax collections have gone up, but companies are not doing enough capital investment. They're not expanding enough. I mean, to put it in simple terms, not opening new factories or expanding existing capacity. What is happening with Blue Star? First, my question is, are you seeing an uptick in sales? Is it going back to pre-pandemic levels? Two, what about expansion? Are you expanding?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to interact with you. I think there is a time lag between the demand and the investments in the capital. As far as the air conditioning industry is concerned, the PLI was announced. It was a well-designed one, and we attend to
production link incentive, right?
That is right, and a lot of investments are taking place. After many years, a record level of investment. In fact, the capacity will double from next year onwards. As far as the sales are concerned, it is at the pre-pandemic level. So from CII also, this is what we are advocating, that manufacturing competitiveness is an important element if we want to become an alternate manufacturing destination in the global supply chain.
Okay.
And,
so therefore, terms, if I can just ask you, you're saying overall there's been a surge, but if I can just ask you about Blue Star, have your sales reached pre-pandemic levels, number one? Number two, and have you also expanded?
Yes, it has reached pre-pandemic level, and we are investing in a large plant in Sri City, which will be commissioned by October itself. So are our competitors. And for the first time in India, integrated supply chain infrastructure for air conditioning is being created. It will be truly world class.
I see, excellent. So does that mean an expansion of, when you say you're putting up a new plant, so that also means new jobs?
100%. That's what I mentioned. The PLI covers every aspect actually. It pushes for infrastructure creation. It provides a lot of employment in the sector as well as the allied sectors. And therefore, money in the hands of the people through employment and the consumption. So it is a cycle.
Okay, that's good to know, because that's the point, Jayant Krishna, who's still with us, that what you mentioned earlier, that you need to expand production-linked incentive to wider sectors. But overall though, I mean, even with the incentives, even with tax breaks, remember corporate tax was cut several budgets ago, brought down to record lows. Why do we still see this hesitation from corporates from investing enough in expanding their capacities and putting more plants and creating more jobs?
So it's a question to me, Vasu?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so see, fundamentally, Vasu, if you look at on ease of doing business, our ranking did improve from 100 plus to 63rd, but we have a long way to go. See, wherever we could deploy technology for online and time-bound approval or some process modifications, some improvements did happen, but still, when there is a human-to-human interaction between the government and the business,
right,
we have a long way to go.
Right.
If we are the 6th largest economy in the world by nominal GDP and 3rd largest by purchasing power parity, why shouldn't we be among the top 10 ease of doing business nations?
Right.
I think we have to look at that. Another thing that investors expect is certain degree of a regulatory certainty in the country. We keep changing our laws every now and then. There are a million mutinies waiting to happen. If you look at Land Acquisition Act, that has made the cost of land acquisition so high in our country,
so
and even the ease of acquiring land is difficult. Right. Labor laws, if you look at the 44 federal laws and the state laws, they need a lot of simplification. Many of them have become outmoded. I think if you look at trade to GDP ratio, we are at a very low level of 37 to 38% as against 56% used to be the trade to GDP ratio in 2011 to 12. So now we have become a nation of non-believers that trade can also create jobs, can spur investments. That's very important. We hike the import duty thinking that we'll protect the domestic industry, but actually what you end up doing is you promote poor quality products at the cost of high quality stuff.
Okay,
and
so
also you're preventing the export of value-added products using the cheaper imports, to reach international markets. Somebody has to look at this very holistically and have trade deals with the major economies like the US, EU, UK, and so on and so forth, including some of the FTAs. I think there has to be a reform centricity all across.
Okay, all across before you can expect this kind of expansion of businesses expanding, investing more. But is that going to be a big challenge, Ranbir Singh Patania? Because as I said, with the context of the elections in this budget and with the context of a huge pressure in terms of jobs, particularly in states like Uttar Pradesh, what is really the hope or the expectation from the government when it comes to addressing that?
You see, on one side, we are focusing on growth. Elections apart, for us country and nation and the global economy is the biggest boom which we are going to hit. Growth is the basic, employment generation is another part which we are going to focus on. If you have just a cursory look on the economic statement, which delineates on our forex reserves, which is on a very considerable position, we are in a good position. If we look at, we could say the performance of Indian forest area, we are at global number 3. If you look at, we could say on climate change part also, we are in a
Patania Saab, the point is that those indices don't necessarily translate into more job creation, which is why when you see even for a lowly government job of a peon or a clerk, you will find lakhs and lakhs of young people who are on the streets.
Sir, with the focus, if we have a cursory look on the economics, with the focus on pushing the growth in agriculture sector, pushing the growth in services sector, and the privatization, giving the stimulus, we are giving stimulus to employment generation, and we are hopeful the government will come out at a level of this will be a big push on employment generation and big push on countering business, which will push the overall growth of the economies.
Okay, Supriya Srined wants to come in. Yes, Supriya.
I just want to say one thing. We can keep quoting indices ad nauseum. We can keep quoting whatever statistics that we want to. The reality is that at this moment, economic recovery will happen if we incentivize small, medium enterprises. And without that economic recovery, there will be no job creation and there will be no uptick in the Indian economy, because that's where the focus, that's where the job guzzling really happens. We can keep talking about big businesses. Corporate tax was cut 2 years ago. What happened? they created jobs? Have they invested? No, they haven't. Because there is no incentive unless consumption improves, and which is why I think the focus of this budget has to be to incentivize the small, medium enterprises so that they revive and they start creating the jobs, because that is the backbone of the Indian economy. I also want to say one little thing here. We can keep talking about ease of doing business, something that I covered for very long, but let me tell you that's a statistic between two cities, Delhi and Mumbai. It doesn't reflect the reality of the country, and the reality of the country is that there is huge joblessness, and agriculture, where incomes were supposed to be double, average farmers today earning 27 rupees a day. You really believe you've done great things for agriculture? So let's talk about agriculture, let's talk about unemployment, but without the focus on bottom of the pyramid, you cannot revive this economy.
Okay, what do you make of that, Mr. Thiagarajan, that while certainly it appears that at the higher tiers of the economy, companies, enterprises seem to be doing well, at least if you look at their balance sheets, there has been quite a hard hit by small businesses, and of course informal sector, the damage there, it's not even quantifiable, because the current statistical architecture often leaves those out. Do you think the government has done enough to throw a safety net to these sorts of businesses and enterprises down the line, or is there a problem?
I think the government has done well, but much more to be done. That's where I am. So, first I will clarify. The PLI schemes itself covers MSMEs as well. The smaller investment also are incentivized. But from CII point of view, of which the MSMEs are a very large part of our membership. So our demands are as follows: that implement the fund of funds scheme is one of our pre-budget memorandum requirements, and the other is that for the technology adoption for use in Industry 4.0, we are asking for incentive. We are repeatedly asking for credit-linked capital subsidy scheme, or the CLCSS, to be extended for technology upgradation. So the MSMEs are integral part of our growth agenda. Without them, we will not be growing at all, even in manufacturing. Okay. I also agree in agriculture. One of the demands we have is with regard to agri-infrastructure development. I'm not getting into MSP and other stuff that's being adequately addressed in your channels right from the morning. The important thing is agri-infrastructure investments also will benefit the agriculture and food processing sector.
Okay. But again, all of this needs money, Jayant Krishna, and does the government have money? They say that they do, because of the fact that tax revenue, overall revenues, they're saying are actually up almost 67%, almost 70% basically year on year. So there does seem to be some extra cash in the hand. Do you think that is going to be spent generously this time? And if the government needs more, where is that going to come from? Because the disinvestment target, as we've shown, we'll put the numbers up on the screen again, way off mark. I think the target last time was close to over 1 lakh crore, almost 1.7 lakh crore. I think at the moment they've only managed to post about 12,000 crores. So that's not going to be a big source of revenue. Where do you think that additional money is going to come from? Yogendra Yadav, who was there earlier, mentioned perhaps some kind of a wealth tax.
So there's some buoyancy in the tax revenues, which hopefully would give some elbow space to the government to spend. Disinvestment, if you look at Air India's disinvestment, has been a step in the right direction, and we need to bring speed and higher velocity to that process. But fundamentally, if you look at, I'll go back to basics, Vasu. It's time that the finance minister addresses the three basic gaps in the way our economy is managed. I'm talking about allocation to education. I'm talking about allocation to science and technology research. I'm talking about allocations to health. In education, if new education policy has to see the light of the day, we spend barely 3% of our GDP on education. This has to go up to 6%. Healthcare, COVID really exposed countries' healthcare system, badly. And we spend just about 1.4 to 1.5% of our GDP on healthcare. Right. It has to go to 3%. scientific research. We spend just about 0.7% of our GDP on R&D, vis-a-vis the developed economy is spending anywhere between 2.5% to 4% of their GDP. And therefore you have very few, breakthrough inventions here. At least the vaccine development in the country showed the way.
Sure.
That, wherever you will take science and technology and research seriously, efforts, outcomes would happen. So I don't expect that on education, science and technology and healthcare, the entire change would happen this year, but at least the budget must signal some change. Otherwise, through a prism of timelessness, we'll keep blaming all the time, our poor ranking by way of per capita income, by way of human development index.
Fair enough. Ranbir Singh Patania, before we go to a break, you want to quickly respond to that while the government keeps claiming that we are investing more in all these areas, education, health and so on, in real or in absolute terms, it's still not very much. It's quite low.
So you are very much right, as very rightly has been pointed out by Mr. Jain. We need to prop up in the field of education. We need to prop up in the field of health also. And above all, in addition to creating more and more money avenues, we need to strengthen the Aam Aadmi. We need to pull out the people from the below poverty level.
Why doesn't the government do that?
In everything, we are focusing on it. I started my address, sir, that last man in the last row. This is the core ideology of Bharatiya Janata Party. We need to strengthen the capital spending. We need to strengthen the macro industries, but small and middle scale. Because MSME, these are main focus. We need to push the man who's working on Manrega part.
It's one thing to say, okay, it's one thing to say this is your ideology and you want to do it, but the other is to actually
we are doing it. Sir,
do it. I need to go. I need to move on. I'll come back to you.
Livelihood mission, Manrega, and
I'll come back to you.
Strengthening the Aam Aadmi, strengthening the Zamindar, the agriculture. This is focus, basic push.
Okay. Let me. I'll come back to you. And Supriya. Give me a second because Sanjeev Bajaj is with us, CMD Bajaj FinServ, Financial Services, also President Designate CII. Good morning, Sanjeev Bajaj. Good to always, as ever, have you on. Now, Sanjeev Bajaj, we're now fairly close, just about, I think, an hour before the budget speech. So just wanted to ask you as well something we've been asking other panelists, that while we talk about the expectations that the corporate sector and other sectors have from the budget, in terms of the corporate sector itself, this gap between, on one hand, we see tax revenue surging, indicating that corporates are doing fairly well, but on the other hand, there's still not enough capital investment, not enough new projects are coming up, not enough jobs are being created. How do you explain that?
Okay, let me take a stab at that, Vasu. One, capital investment, as you know, we are seeing enough green shoots of those coming from the private sector. We recently did a survey among some members, and over 50% are already engaging in various levels of capital investment. Now, this is going to take a few quarters by the time this actually hits the ground running. A lot depends on demand, and we know demand has been erratic. We have good months between lockdown where we see fairly strong consumer demand. There could be several sectors that don't have it, but broadly if you see it, that's why our indirect tax collections also have been good. So we need to make sure consumer demand stays steady. To do that, we have to make sure the pandemic remains in control. For example, this particular wave has been very well controlled because of all the investments in healthcare. But we have to continue working on that. Use the right scientific advisors, but go ahead with boosters, go ahead with mix and match, get the next set of therapeutics in. Anticipate change. You could get a bad strain coming, so anticipate the change. Because only when the common man feels that his life is secure is he going to go and empty his wallet. So that's one. Second is, government has played a significant role in putting liquidity in the hands of the most vulnerable and MSMEs. Continue doing that because we are not out of this pandemic yet. Continue the investment in infrastructure for some time, and as long as we keep things stable, the private sector investments are going to come, and once that comes, that's going to be a force multiplier. So that's how I would answer this question.
So just to ask you, very interesting things you said, I want to take you up on several of those, but just to ask you, Sanjeev Bajaj, on your own area which you work in, Bajaj Financial Services, what are you seeing in terms of the change? Are you seeing an uptick in terms of your own growth? And
So very interestingly, for example, if you see through the second wave, we saw rural India continuing to show very strong growth on consumption. Urban slowed down again through the lockdowns, but because the lockdowns were more micro-contained, it was much better than the first wave. Interestingly, in the last couple of months, rural has started slowing down for multiple reasons, and that's why one of CII's suggestions also is to continue with the Manrega scheme, give it more teeth going ahead, because it plays a very significant role. Urban, on the other hand, has come back. And we know that there are some sectors, like the lowest end of the economy buys cheap motorcycles, that is still down. We know that any product which has got chips, computer chips, those are down. But otherwise, we are seeing strong momentum. January is looking good. Even through this wave, we are finding it wherever we can get feet on the ground, we are seeing good demand.
Okay, but I do want to ask you, when you said that the government has done enough to put liquidity in the hands of those, particularly at the lower tiers of the economy, the poor, the disadvantaged, the counter view is that in terms of our own stimulus package or financial packages, the multiple Atmanirbhar schemes, these were amongst the stingiest in the world. The spending was barely 1% of GDP in terms of actual cash out to the government. Do you think that there's much more that can be done there, particularly, as you say, to stimulate demand, to break this cycle of low demand and therefore, low capital spending?
Yeah, so the challenge that we had as a country is we don't have a strong large currency like some of the Western countries, or even countries like Japan, where they could spend a lot and a half back, pushing the government to spend even more. But I must say that in hindsight, they have balanced this quite well. Now, I do believe something more on the consumption side could have helped, but I'm also encouraged to see that many months in the last 6 months, we are seeing very strong consumption numbers. So I believe that we are in the right balance, but what we have to be careful about is that there could be additional waves in the pandemic. There could be situations where the government needs to spend more. So they need to keep some of their gunpowder dry for some of these emergency situations.
All right, okay, fascinating. Well, we just are already seeing on the screen both the finance minister at Rashtrapati Bhavan, sharing a copy, presenting a copy of the budget to the president, and of course the traditional sight of the budget papers being unloaded at Parliament House in those large satchels. Supriya, as a reporter, would remember covering those on many occasions. So that countdown has begun, and but we have to take a break, and we'll come back with NDTV's rolling coverage.